And we are live. Welcome, Dharma.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is going to be, I think, this is going to be a treat. I've been looking forward to this for a while now. Thanks for everybody that's joined the broadcast. I introduce you to Dharma Pachner. I've met Dharma 10 years ago, something like that. Our kids were going to school together, and maybe 7 years ago, something like that. But yeah, kids were going to school together, and I remember we got connected somehow, maybe while you're coaching soccer or something like that. We started talking about company I was launching back then, ID Agent. And, I kind of took you through the concept, and you're like, you got a chance, an opportunity to be ridiculously different in this marketplace. And boy, were you right. Because remember we worked with you guys early on, and just the concepts you guys came up for that company was just incredible. So I've enjoyed just watching all of your work since then. We've been re-engaged with you guys to help freshen up our brand here moving forward as well. So I'm a big fan. So I'm really looking forward to this. And so if folks have questions as Dharma is going through this presentation, please feel free to drop them into the comments, and toward the end of the presentation, we'll open up for questions. But so Dharma, I guess take us through, really the premise behind what you're going to show today.
Absolutely. So first off, Kevin, Caitlin, thank you, and everyone who's on the webinar, thank you for taking the time to listen today. So our presentation is on being the contrast. Specifically in this context, how to conceive and create strikingly different brand experiences that stand apart and to see a similarity. And I think Kevin alluded to how we initially met in the first brand opportunity we had together. So we'll walk through that. We'll walk through a number of other examples as well as I go through this presentation. The official description of this event, if you saw it on the webinar, kind of sort of set the stage for what it is we're looking to try to do here. But really kind of speaking to the challenge of like the IT channel space, and we've seen this both with our work with ID Agent, Inky, channel program, a number of other things, just how crowded and saturated that space is, and how difficult it is for organizations to stand out effectively in that space. So from our perspective, there's a lot of opportunities for brand and how brands can sort of effectively help organizations stand out and communicate effectively in crowded marketplaces. So that's going to be the focus of the presentation today. But I thought what I would do is just start with a quick intro into who I am and our genesis as an agency, because I do think it definitely informs how we think and how we approach all things branding.
I'm gonna take myself off the screen, so I'll let you fly here. Here you go.
Oh, sure. So as Kevin mentioned, I'm Dharma, and I tell people like my name is one of the reasons I became a designer. I grew up in Montgomery County, Maryland, in the late 1970s, early 80s, and I remember from the time I was a kid, but like my name stood out like a sore thumb. I went to this small Catholic elementary school where this was my uniform, like Monday through Friday, 5 days a week. This was a world I was very comfortable with and felt very sort of safe and familiar. I'm half Indian. My mother's from India, and she would always insist on coming to back to school events and parent-teacher conferences, and would always want to wear her traditional Indian attire, her saris. And if you've ever seen these up close, they're just explosions of color and fabric and light and texture. And I remember as a kid, our families just stood out. Our family stood out like as a sore thumb. And I found the entire experience just completely mortifying. I didn't want any part of standing out. I didn't want any part of being different. And then I discovered design. And I discovered design post-college, and I fell in love with the philosophy right away, because at its core it was this idea that embraced and celebrated the things that are unique. Those are the things that are memorable and motivating and effective. I think I existentially needed that philosophy. I became a designer, and then about 8 years ago, my partner and I, Karen, set out to build Contrast and Company. So Contrast at its core is a design principle around being sort of strikingly different from everything else that's around it. And going back into the crux of the challenge, like most of the spaces that we're in, whether we're in the channel space, the technology space, the cybersecurity space, what have you, what we see is this like sea of similarity where organizations use the same constructs and the same sort of visual conventions to tell their story. So first and foremost, we try to think about like, how do we create strikingly different like brand experiences in the space? Like, how do we create an experience that really is sort of like without a peer and without a precedent? But it's not enough to just be unique for the sake of being unique. We try to think about, how do we create an experience that can help advance an organization where they need to go? How do we create experiences that are scalable and that can continue to pay off dividends long after the foundation is complete? And then lastly, like, how do we create experiences that people love? And I think it's such a highly underrated characteristic of good brands is they're just likable. Like, they instantly form the right types of like emotional connections. They need to be backed up with whatever substance, depth, and detail necessary. But the initial reaction, the initial experience people have with these brands is a positive one. And that's what we strive to do with the brands that we create. When I talk about brands, I thought what I would do is just get into the basics a bit. Brand's one of those words that can be misinterpreted and interpreted, or different people have different sort of definitions of what it is and what it represents. For the purposes of the conversation today, the way we're defining a brand is from a number of different perspectives. Like, from a foundational perspective, we see a brand as a robust design and messaging framework that shapes and defines how an organization communicates its story to the world. From a marketing perspective, we see a brand as the opportunity to help an organization increase market awareness, increase market recognition, and increase memorability. From a messaging perspective, a brand is a tool that helps an organization capture, articulate, and express their value proposition in clear and motivating ways. From a sales and business development perspective, a brand provides the necessary tools and resources and assets in order for teams to effectively engage with their audiences. From a financial perspective, a brand can help increase the perception of value of an organization. And we see a lot of this in the acquisition space. And we'll walk through examples of this as well. From a consumer perspective, a brand captures and reflects the face and personality of an organization. From a cultural perspective, a brand aligns employees and recruits. It helps sort of define the mission, mindset, and operating values of an organization. And then lastly, from an intangible perspective, a brand can just generate an intense amount of passion, pride, and loyalty. It can capture and can create an emotional attachment that marketing spreadsheets can't really even begin to capture. So as we think about a brand, we first and foremost think about it as a tool to help sort of accomplish and achieve these outcomes. The process to do that, and this is a very greatly simplified version of this, and then we'll get into examples in a second. We always look at it first and foremost, like, what is the problem we're solving, or what is the opportunity we're creating? And anytime you start a brand conversation, it really should start around those two key things. And those ideas really need to be the lens in which you view and make all subsequent decisions around the brand. So first, it's understanding what success looks like. Then it's understanding the specific motivations and needs of your audiences. Then it's just understanding the realities of your industry, the realities of the competition, just the realities of the market in general. From there, it's distilling it down and understanding the various touch points and the various ways and means in which your brand is going to interact. And then from there, it's defining a brand down to an idea. And I'll walk through examples of all of this in a minute. We do try to define a brand down to an idea. We try to develop a messaging framework around it. We use that messaging framework to support the visual identity. And then the last things that we create are the expressions, the actual executions. But I'll come back to all of these ideas in a minute. I'll come back to the idea of an idea. I'll come back to the idea of a framework. And expressions in this context are the actual applications of a brand. So websites, sales materials, one-sheeters, marketing bits of communication. So when people ask, first, like, thinking about like what is a framework and how do we think about it, the way we look at a brand in general is like, this is to us as a representation of a brand. And at the core, I think at the apex or peak of every great brand has to be a really powerful orienting idea, which provides like structure and meaning for everything that sits below it. Below that idea is then how that idea is then expressed in the name of an organization, the brand position, messaging themes, the visual identity. And then very at the bottom of the pyramid is those actual executions and expressions, the websites and marketing materials and one-sheeters and what have you. But this idea of like this core idea being at the foundation of a brand, this is not sort of a small obligatory step along the way. I think this is at the core of creating a brand experience that feels different and motivating in the space. And we're always asked by clients and prospects, like, what does an idea look like? Like, how do you give an idea like form and shape? And I remember, like, this is one of the first brand ideas I ever saw. And I remember exactly where I was standing when I first saw this campaign for Apple. And the reason it was so profoundly different was at the time when I was growing up in the late 1970s and early 80s, personal computers were just becoming a thing. I was absolutely obsessed with them. And every single personal computer ad looked like this. It was like, look how much like knowledge and wisdom and intellect you can shove into this cardboard box. And Apple took such a profoundly different approach to it. It was like, it wasn't about the machine, but it was about what the machine allowed you to achieve. So when we think about a brand idea, we always try to like look for the opportunity to like think beyond products, to think beyond services, to think beyond platforms, and really try to think about what is the opportunity to raise the messaging. This is another example. This is one of my favorite ad concepts of all time. It's about a 40-year-old ad concept. But you realize, again, they were able to transcend the product and the service and make a subtle but really profound shift in terms of how they message and communicate it. So what we try to think about with brands first and foremost is how do you create a distinctive idea in the space? Like, how do you elevate your value proposition? And then from there, what we try to identify is like, how do we make that ownable? And what I mean by ownable in this context is there's a number of different signals we can use as designers in order to shape the direction of a brand. We can use color. We can use various types of shapes and constructs. We can use typography. We can use imagery choices that we make. And then we can use the composition, like how those pieces come together. And when those brand elements come together, when brand signals come together in a consistent way, like the results are incredibly powerful, right? You look at this ad and it's clearly Reese's. There's thousands of other candy companies and confectionaries out there that make peanut butter cups. Reese's has done such a masterfully consistent job of of applying these same brand signals over and over again. They can own this look and feel. Same thing here with McDonald's. Like every major fast food company uses red in their logo mark. McDonald's has done such a masterfully consistent job of applying it throughout all of their signals. So as we go through the creation process, we try to think about what are we trying to capture, what are we trying to convey, and then how do the design choices we make that help support those objectives. So if you look at this guy or this woman, you realize like she has to be yellow. Yellow is an optimistic color. It's positive. It's aspirational. But what we see a lot of times in the branding space is like over time, you see these subtle contradictions between like the visual language an organization is using to communicate their message and the actual messages that they're giving across. So you create this dissonance in the eyes of your audiences. And I'll show you examples of this in a minute as well. So as we go through this process, we try to look at everything, and they'll teach you in design school. There's over like 20 different parts to a letter form. And we'll try to think about these different considerations and how they should factor in and shape the direction of a brand. But we do it with a very pragmatic understanding, like your buying audiences probably don't care that you're picking this font or that font, but that doesn't mean that they didn't respond to the experience that you created. So as again, going back to this idea, we try to create and we try to think about how do you create experiences that people feel first and then understand second. So going back to the challenge of, you have an enormous amount of organizations and vendors sort of fighting it for visibility and space in this market. Like, how do you create contrast? Like, how do you stand out and create something different? So what we've done is we've put together a number of different examples to give you a sense of how this works. The first example and the last example I'm going to share with you are outside the channel because I just kind of want to show you how the thinking translates. But we'll walk through a number of representative examples in the channel as well. So this is one of the first brand campaigns we did. This is Hogan Lovells is a global law firm. We did not create their logo mark, but we were being tasked with branding their global regulatory practice, which in and of itself, I think was 1,000+ attorneys all over the world. And as part of this, they were really struggling with like, how do we come up with a distinct message? How do we come up with a distinct way to say that message? And as we were going through the discovery process, we were just learning about the regulatory space in general, and just learning like some of the terms and some of the descriptions that the attorneys were using to describe this space. It's this tangled mesh of rules. It's these shifting standards. It's impossible for organizations to understand the space, like let alone being able to advance in it. So we went back and did our work and did our concepting and brainstorming. And what you're going to see on the following few slides is a small snapshot of what we presented back to them. But basically, so we offer an unprecedented depth of skill, range of experience, yada, yada, yada. That is not what defined them as a practice. What defined them was a sort of fundamentally different view of the regulatory space. It wasn't a force to be feared. It wasn't an obstacle to overcome. It was simply a reality. And the organizations that could understand and navigate that reality were the organizations that would be able to advance within it. And we really like this idea of being able to communicate advancement in the face of complexity. So we realized that once we go back and took a full look at the title of the practice, if we strip out the extraneous letters, we can distill it down to a pretty simple concept. So that's what we ended up doing. We ended up building an entire brand experience around this idea of go. From a visual standpoint, they're a global law firm with attorneys and clients all over the world. So we wanted an experience that could rely on like universal symbolism as a way to sort of capture and reinforce the narrative. So whether you're in Beijing, whether you're in Brazil, we wanted an experience that could visually communicate as much through the design choices as through the words. We had inherited the color green, or we'd inherited the logo mark as part of this effort. And one of the things we realized is green's an incredibly effective color at communicating momentum and advancement and motion and activity. So we built an entire brand experience around the idea of green photography, reinforcing that idea. So now you can just start to get a sense of how it starts to translate into microsites, how it started to translate into all of their print collateral and various types of materials, how it starts to translate into white papers and thought leadership content. Always a very effective litmus test, like how it starts to translate as you start to think about like mobile experiences. Now I'm just clicking through so you can get a general sense of the look and feel and how it starts to go. As we describe clients as an exercise in purpose first and then consistency second. So thinking about like when you think about a brand, like how do we frame out the messaging so that every single person within this firm, every single attorney understands the key ideas and philosophies around what this practice is and what it represents. So again, thinking in like details around like if we're going to build a brand experience around this idea of go, like clearly define what that means, and then more importantly, clearly communicate how that creates value and benefits for their clients and prospects. So I'm just clicking through so you can get a general sense of it, but it's taking an idea, it's giving an idea visual identity, and then it's establishing like the frameworks and the communication pieces. This is the photography guide for the brand alone. But if you're going to build a brand entirely based around the idea of green photography, like having like sort of clear parameters for how it's being used, clear parameters for the different types of applications and ways it can be applied. And this for us, this is what we wanted in the end. This was one of their attorneys in Bora Bora, where they were submitting photos of themselves all over the world in a state of go. And this is what I mean by trying to come up with an experience that feels different in the space and trying to come up with an experience that can help create an emotional reaction along with an intellectual one. So that's an example completely outside the channel. What I wanted to do is jump into the channel a bit and give you a sense of how we've done these types of things in this space. Kevin had brought up ID Agent, and ID Agent was the first opportunity we had to work with him and his team. And this was the experience that we first had when we first started working together. And this sort of checks off all the boxes. It's clean. It's easy to kind of work with at a very high level. It communicated some of the key value propositions of the platform and what it was and how it worked. And one of the things we were trying to figure out doing was like, how do we create something like this is a well put together brand? How do we create something that really can stand out and be different in the space? And as part of that effort, we were just trying to get a sense of like, what does cybersecurity look like? Like if you actually had to give it form and structure, like what does it look like from an imagery standpoint? So when you do an image search for things like cybersecurity, you see stuff like this. You see you see the inherent challenge and the complexity of like capturing and conveying this idea. So you see a lot of these like very Photoshoppy executions and tons of like binary code and hooded figures and sort of combinations of all of these sort of elements, because this is an inherently difficult concept to sort of capture through traditional visuals. So we wanted something that looked different. And Kevin kept talking about the dark web and this object that people really don't understand, don't even see, can't even really tell what it's there. So in our mind's eye, the dark web looked like something like this. It's this object that has like no real structure to it, has no real integrity. Like you reach out and grab it and it's not there. So we like the idea of leaning into that as a metaphor. We had inherited the hexagon as part of the original logo shape. We realized we could embed those two things together, tie them together, orient an idea around it, and then build an entire visual vocabulary around it. So this was one of our first brand efforts in the cybersecurity space. But again, trying to think about like, how do we take this product and the service that it's offering, which is unique in the industry, and how do we capture and serve it up in a way that people can understand and recognize it? And even taking concepts like this as part of the discovery process, we just learned like how flawed and how porous the password system is in general. So how do we sort of capture and convey those ideas in ways that people can understand and represent? We had developed a whole set, I won't get into the details, but a whole set of supporting iconography and a whole set of supporting systems around it. But again, as we think about these brands, we try to think about like, how do we create experiences that stand out? And how do we create something that just feels fun and unexpected in the space? So that was one of the first ones we had done in the space. Another one we had done that was also trying to find some visibility and some differentiation in the market was an organization called Inky. Inky's anti-phishing software. This was the brand we inherited. And as we were going through the discovery process, one of the things we were trying to do is like, what are the opportunities to really add personality and tell a story? And we realized like we really like the origin of the Inky story and how it came to be. And so we started with that, and we just kind of like first look for opportunities to just enhance the visuals a little bit, just give it a little bit more weight. And then we started thinking about, first off, like, let's lean into this thing. Like, let's really sort of like capture and convey the idea. Like, let's personify the product. So bestowed with a unique intelligence and guided by unprecedented vision. Like, let's make sure we're starting to give it like human characteristics. And then one of the things we realized as we went through the discovery process is we watched a number of documentaries on octopi. And we realized like the same characteristics that make an octopus so effective underwater, their ability to blend in, their ability to see, their ability to move quickly, were the exact same characteristics of the software platform. So we realized we could take that identity, and by making these modifications to it, we can speak to the strength of the platform to defend against phishing threats. We can speak to the strength of the platform and its visibility, and it's able to detect threats that are coming in, its ability to blend in seamlessly into the working environment, its ability to sort of understand, learn, and constantly be looking for new threats on the horizon. So taking this brand look and feel and building a narrative around it and building sort of a visual vocabulary that can sort of capture and express that idea. So again, as we think about brands, we try to think about like, what is the opportunity to tell a different story? And then what are the opportunities to use visuals and to use design constructs to reinforce and capture those ideas? Now I'm just clicking through so you can get a quick sense of like how it starts to translate in a few other ways. There's also another opportunity to not just like have an interesting message and an interesting look and feel, but there's also a real opportunity to think about like, how do you use design to more effectively communicate your value proposition? So this is the before. This is a technology company that sells a software platform to healthcare organizations, major hospital systems. And basically what they do is they connect all of the fragmented areas, the fragments in healthcare. So if I've just broken my leg, my personal care physician might know this, my radiologist might know this, my orthopedic surgeon might know this. These Audacious Inquiry makes a platform that connects all of those various pieces together. So as we were starting to go through and look at their existing brand experience, I think the first thing we try to look at is try to get a sense of like, what is this organization trying to communicate? And one thing they wanted to communicate is they're really trying to connect healthcare and create these sort of bold solutions around it. So we were just, we'll look at their existing materials and their white papers and their interactive thought leadership content. And then it gives us a lens to look at and determine, like, are we sort of capturing and conveying, or is this organization using their brand to sort of capture and convey their most salient points? And one of the things we realized is like, this is like, when we look at a brand experience like this, like we weren't getting the experience, or we weren't getting the impression of a bold solution in the healthcare space. And this is exactly what I mean when I say a dissonance. Like, this is a really leading platform, but the brand experience around it wasn't sort of capturing and conveying what they were doing, and it wasn't elevating the value of the product itself. So we started thinking about, well, how do we use design to more effectively tell a story? And if the idea is that the healthcare experience today offers this very sort of fragmented view of people, like you have all of your physicians and caregivers have these very sort of disparate, disconnected images of individual patients. This is an organization that creates this platform that can allow healthcare providers to see a fuller picture of their patients. So this is how we can then start to think about using design and brand to not just create an ownable look and feel, but to create a look and feel that can capture and reinforce a key part of the value proposition. So using these disparate squares as a design technique that we can use to tell a story. And then it can translate. So as you think about a brand experience, we always want to think about, like, how do we create an experience with legs? Like, how do you create an experience that can seamlessly like translate over to digital ads, or translate over to trade shows, or outdoor advertising? So I'm just clicking through so you can get a general sense of the building blocks. But as we go through these things, we just try to think about, like, how much range and how much extensibility can we give it? So what you're seeing here was just sort of a hypothetical campaign for the organization, but we can take this idea of when it comes to Robert's Health, like, who does care? Like, who is actually responsible for any one person's care at any given point in time? So again, as we think about a brand, we just try to think about, like, what are the opportunities to create something that visually reinforces what it is they do. So I've got a few more I'll just click through to give you a sense of like how the process works. Again, this is a technology vendor. This is the before, and they make software to help sort of reduce the number of no-shows and missed appointments that get in the way of the doctor-patient experience. So we worked with them, and their name of their platform was Dash. We realized, like, let's kind of lean into that. Like, let's lean into this idea of being able to connect all of these various dots, or these various sort of disconnected pieces in healthcare. And then we built an entire brand experience around that concept of Dash and the gaps in healthcare. So now I'm just clicking through so you can get a quick sense of it. But this is one of those things from a design perspective, is we try to create experiences. We want to create experiences that are recognizable. We want to create experiences that are easy to recreate, that lend themselves to various types of design systems, and they give us a lot of range, like give us a lot of different sort of applications and ways we can sort of work with them and manipulate them. Few more, I'll just walk through these fairly quickly. I think we try to look for, like, what are the opportunities to always give it personality. This is an organization, Birdie. This is an online pharmacy delivery platform that we've created that we've worked with an organization to launch from scratch, including the name. But again, thinking about, like, the use of shape, the use of colors, the use of the various elements, and how we can start to bring them together to start to establish, like, a look and a feel and a consistent personality that can extend from everything from their digital applications and digital touch points to actually, like, things like their delivery services. So a few other ones. One thing we try to do from a brand perspective is, like, look for opportunities to make things consistent. This is a technology company we've been working with. This is the before. Altum, one of the things they were struggling with was Altum was the name of their organization. Their flagship product was something called Proposal Central. So between the three of them, they had a number of sort of disparate, like, brand experiences around the various things, which created a lot of confusion in the eyes of their audiences. So we work with them first and foremost on, like, coming up with, like, a simpler design construct, like come up with a design construct where there's some real continuity between the master brand and all of the various products that sit underneath of it, and then make sure that design system can then continue to like scale and translate down. So we worked with them on developing like an exhaustive like design system, both for the parent brand and then for all of the various like product lines that sit underneath of it. But as I click through again, you're just hopefully getting a sense of like, as we go through, how do we start to form and shape a visual narrative around the brand so that there's a recognizable and overall like visual consistency in those elements. One thing we try to do with all of these things, and one thing, a real opportunity, is to elevate the message. So this is another player in the channel space, Cognito. They are a cybersecurity software that helps identify and protect like the gaps across an organization's surface level. But their existing brand experience kind of got into the nuts and bolts of like of what it was they were doing. And they were talking about this idea of like risk is this thing. If you don't have a cybersecurity strategy today as an organization, you don't have a business strategy, and that the risk from cyber is much bigger than just cyber alone. So we worked with them on taking that brand, taking this idea of gaps in security. We built an entire brand experience around this concept and then oriented it around this idea of rule your risk. So Cognito offers a new approach to risk management, resulting in positive business impact. We go beyond external attack surface management to help organizations identify, understand, and master their external risk. So from a design perspective, like leaning into these concepts like gaps and shapes as a way to sort of capture and convey what it is we want to communicate. Also from a design perspective, we were using these shapes in a number of different ways, and we can use them as like orienting mechanisms for things like digital ads, for things like social posts, and even for things like team values. Just clicking through so you can get a quick sense of like how that experience starts to come together. But the real opportunity, again, is take an idea and then build an ownable and recognizable visual identity that sort of captures and reinforces that. And then last two, I was going to share with you this one. And I think a lot of the times what we find in like the vendor in the channel space in general is there's a lot of complexity in these platforms. There's a lot of complexity in the offering, and like capturing and conveying that complexity in ways that people can understand is the inherent challenge. This is Sorcero. This is the before. They're a natural language intelligence processing platform, struggling with sort of the same things, like struggling with sort of a consistent way to sort of capture and communicate the value of what it is they do. So we worked with them on sort of reimagining the brand identity. I won't get into the nuts and bolts of all of the details around it, but building this brand experience, first and foremost, like natural language intelligence just allows people to process information quicker and more effectively. So we built a simpler system around it, built a simpler sort of construct around that idea, and then started like looking for opportunities to like to reflect like how the platform views and functions through the use of their brand. And this is one of those things, again, taking something that's sort of highly complex in nature and just sort of distilling it down in ways that are easier for people to recognize and to process, and then building off of a system around it. Just clicking through. And then I will show you. I'll show you one last one. I'll show you one outside of. I'll show you one outside of the space. This is the before. This is Fund Rebel, and they are a real estate investment platform. So you can collectively pull your money in and invest in real estate versus in stocks and mutual funds and what have you. And they are trying to be a real disruptor in the market. They wanted a brand experience that could sort of lean into that. And built around this name Fund Rebel. So first and foremost, so thinking about the mark itself and like how we can take that and work with it. We start thinking about first, like how can marks just function with like the minimal of sort of context around them. But one thing we wanted to try to do with this particular brand is like, how do we create a shape that communicates the idea of multiple people coming together and investing in real estate, together. So what we ended up doing is we like this idea of this landscape in general, and I'll spare you the whole buildup and how it all worked, but we started thinking about this as an organization that is bringing a lot of disruption to the space. This is an organization that's bringing a lot of disparate, sometimes first-time investors to the space, doing something different. This is an organization that is moving into specifically into real estate, and how those pieces can start to come together as a brand element. So again, trying to think about what are the opportunities to use design and use brands to sort of capture and reinforce what an organization is doing. And then what is the opportunity to reinforce the voice of that brand or the perspective of that brand. So I'm just clicking through so you can get a quick sense of like the building blocks and how those signals apply. Again, very much outside your space, but I think a lot of the same thinking and methodologies apply. Just clicking through so you can get a quick sense of how it works. And actually, let me see. I'm going to just skip ahead for 1 second. And I'm going to just do one last one. And again, moving outside the space a little bit. There's always opportunities to be unexpected. This is an organization called Capel. And what they make is they make these highly sophisticated devices that go in through the vascular system and help facilitate stroke operations and other sort of neurovascular processes. They have this product called Walrus, which was named Walrus because it was bigger than anything else out on the market. But they also had other products that had other specific characteristics. They were going with this sort of animal-based approach to it. But they were running into challenges, like how do you communicate sort of the challenges and complexities of the other products in the market. So I think one of the things we try to do, and again, a neurovascular company is no exception, like how do we create some personality around what it is that they do? And then how do we create a design experience that like seamlessly sort of rolls into their communication strategy? So we worked with first, it's a little bit of an odd name, but sort of leaning into the name a bit and then leaning into the mark. And one of the first things we try to think about with a mark in general, a logo in general, is like, how flexible is it? Like how many different ways can you use it? And one of the things we realized is we can sort of lean into this cue. Since then, they had started with 2 products. I think we've moved on to about 5 or 6 now. But we can build this whole visual language around it. We can use this shape in a number of different ways. We can then create these like product and identity systems for their various lines, for their various offerings. We can create these supporting sub-brand identities around them. So I'm just clicking through so you can get a general sense of the building blocks and how it works. But again, the opportunity, there's no space where you can't bring in sort of a fresh energy or a fresh sort of visual perspective into that. So what you're seeing here is some of the more technical documentation, but even taking that background shape and just using it as a way to add texture and as a way to reinforce some of the key ideas and concepts around the organization. Just clicking through so you can get a quick sense of it. And not that they're rushing out to do swag or giveaways anytime soon, but for us, this is always like effective litmus test. Like in whatever space we're in, can we create a brand experience that can sort of extend and grow beyond that? So we've got a million other examples, but I think we thought this would be potentially a good stopping point in general. What I'd love to do is open it up, see if there's any sort of immediate questions or thoughts, and then we can take it from there.
Hey, I'm going to jump back in here real quick. Let me drop this down. So I've got a couple of questions because I've worked with you, and thank you for all the examples because I think it really highlights, especially again relating to the channel, the need to be different, right? The need to stand out because there's a lot of the platforms, especially in the cyberspace, are very complex, and a lot of the organizations have a hard time differentiating themselves. So really, it calls for like trying to figure out how do you really stand out. But so we work with you, kind of reimagining the ID Agent brand, and then we're working with you on kind of the launch and then the relaunch of the Channel Pro brand. So I don't know how. Let me think about from like maybe a rebrand standpoint. How do you? Like what's like the first thing you do when you approach a rebrand, I guess?
Well, I think the first thing you do is before even, I think you have to identify, going back to the objectives, what is the problem you're solving? What is the opportunity you're creating? Because I think a lot of times, like we look at brands, there are some brands we look at, like no brand is ever inherently good or bad just on the surface. I think we always try to identify what is an organization trying to communicate, what are they trying to accomplish, and then do the choices they make from a brand perspective, do their design choices, do their messaging choices, do they align with and support those objectives, or do they contradict them? But it gives us an effective litmus test as we go through the process to make sure like we're always focused. We always want to be focused on objectives and outcomes versus like the aesthetics and the ornamentation of it. So I'd say the first question is really like, what is the problem we're solving? What is the opportunity we're creating? And then from there, then we can determine like, how is the brand, what are the opportunities for the brand to more effectively do that?
You know, I guess just relating again to my experience, you know, two companies, you know, how do you, and I think I kind of understand the answer to this question because I know we've been difficult both times. You know, we being, you know, on my side have been difficult to work with, I guess. But how do you get kind of different groups, you know, different people that get different opinions or ideas of what a brand should be or a rebrand should be? How do you get them all aligned?
That's a really good question. That actually speaks to probably one of the biggest challenges in the branding process is not the creation of the assets, which is not insignificant, but it's getting the overall alignment in human nature and all that to support it. I think the biggest thing you can do is make sure, like, we never want to sell our work. Like, if you sell the work, it's just, design is way too subjective. I think the key thing is always making sure you're selling the thinking behind it. So it's like, if you're selling the thinking behind it, then it becomes less like, I like the color yellow or I like the color green. It's more like, this is what we're trying to communicate. This is the association. This is what we want people to feel. That's why we're making the choices we make. So I think as much as possible, talking through the thinking and the rationale behind the choices you make, whether words or visuals, I think goes a long way. I think the other thing too is people need to be heard. Like, when you are creating a brand experience, the goal is not to like listen to a bunch of people and then come back with something beautiful that's completely out there. The goal is to come back and encapsulate what you've heard in a way that when people see their voice, their words, their sentiments, their ideas, their thoughts expressed in the brand that they're seeing, that goes a long way into just getting overall like alignment and acceptance, especially as you're trying to like onboard a brand throughout an organization.
Again, we're kind of relating it to maybe even, you know, more recent, like our experience and why we're doing it. But what are some of the reasons why these groups, you know, would approach you guys to go through a rebrand? And I know for us early on, like ideation was like how to stand out, you know, and just be completely different. But, you know, are there commonalities? You kind of see, you know, common characteristics of companies that come and say, hey, we need a refresh because something's not working.
Yeah, it's more often than not, there's usually not one specific reason. It's usually a number of different things. Sometimes it's an organization's looking to be acquired and they want to like just sort of raise their perception of value. They want to communicate their message more clearly. A lot of times organizations have what they think is a really groundbreaking product or service, but the way it's being communicated and conveyed isn't sort of capturing and expressing it in any sort of demonstrable way. A lot of times it is a lack of internal alignment and understanding within an organization. Like, everybody's describing the various products and services differently. Sometimes it is two organizations coming together and having to then reconcile under a single brand name and concept. So there's a variety of business reasons or marketing reasons why a brand or why a rebrand is usually brought to the table. A lot of times there's overlap, but more often than not, the core of it is the brand, whether it never originally did or if the organization has evolved, the brand is no longer effectively telling an accurate and compelling story around what it is an organization represents today.
Yeah. All right. So you might want to be careful how you answer this next one, but how long does it normally take to do a rebrand?
Well,
I'm just kidding. Because I know we're going through it right now, and it has been a fun process. But how long does it normally take?
That's a great question, actually. So it depends. It's the building the foundation, generally speaking. When I say the foundation, meaning the overall building blocks of the brand. So the new identity, the messaging, brand guidelines, all of that. Building those foundation elements is usually about give or take about a 3-month process. And then the actual activation, like creating the website and sales materials and digital ads and design systems, all that, that's another 6 to 9 months or so. I'd say give or take all in, it's usually between, if you're creating a full brand and building all the activation pieces and getting everything up and out, I'd say it's about a 9-month process or so, depending on the website tends to be the biggest often the biggest variable in there. But the thing we tell people all the time is that, and I'm going to butcher this, but I'll tell it anyways, is I'll use this example. If you are a plane taking off from LA to the East Coast, and you adjust that nose of the plane 3 inches this way or 3 inches that way, that plane's going to end up in New York or it's going to end up in Florida. And that's kind of how we try to do it with a brand as well. It's like we try to think about that early period as let's make all the adjustments that we need to make now, because those adjustments are going to have like major implications and ramifications 2, 3, 5 years down the road. So that being said, about a 3-month window to create the foundation is enough time for us to confidently feel like we're creating a foundation that has real range, and about another 6 months or so to like build out like the execution pieces, depending on the size and complexity of an organization.
Cool. Fair enough. Look, Dharma, I can't thank you enough for participating today. I mean, I think that the content and just taking us through the examples of what you guys have done, and I've experienced it now twice, and it's been fantastic. I can't wait. We're in the middle of our project here, and I think we've got a couple big announcements over the next couple of weeks, couple of months. So thank you for letting us work with you. But I guess where can people find you guys? What's the best way to connect with you in Contrast?
Yeah, for sure. Well, first off, thank you again, Kevin and Caitlin and Channel Program. We've been energized since we first heard about Channel Program and recognizing sort of the need and the opportunity in the market. So we're thrilled to play a small part and be a small part of this community. As far as getting a hold of us, I think the best way to do it is just come to our website, contrastandco.com. Our contact information and everything is there. And just reach out to us anytime. We'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. Well, thanks. And anybody has any questions, for Dharma, send them on in. And let's see, couple of comments coming in here. Oh, Kevin, yeah, Dana, I gotta get you back for some of these comments. But thanks for everybody listening, and we'll hopefully see you here in the near term. All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you, everyone.